Welcome to Talking Europe. Well, European leaders have called for urgent arms talks with Russia. The country that many European states blame for funding populist political parties in the EU accuses of cyber attacks in a bid to confuse the electorate with lies, or as they're now calling it, fake information. The EU, of course, slapped sanctions on Moscow after it annexed Crimea back in 2014. The Ukraine crisis led to the worst freeze in East-West relations since the Cold War. But recent elections in Eastern Europe, in Moldova or EU member Bulgaria, have seen pro-Russian candidates elected. In France, also, the centre-right candidate for presidential elections is calling for an end to those EU sanctions and says that the EU provoked Moscow by expanding NATO's presence. Well, will the arrival of Donald Trump to the White House in the US change anything on EU-Russian relations? Is the EU softening its opposition to Russia, and should it? With us to discuss that, we have Tatiana Zdanoka, you're a Latvian MEP here at the European Parliament. Beside you, we have Mr. Arne Lietz, a German MEP, and across the table we have Jana Thum from Estonia. Thanks all for being with us. Ms. Thum, maybe I will start with your good self. These sanctions that were slapped on Russia in 2014, they've been renewed every 6 months since, up for renewal again at the end of January, at which stage we'll have a new US president in the White House, someone who wants those sanctions dropped. Will his presence change anything? Do we need to renew the sanctions?
Frankly speaking, nobody knows what Mr. Trump is going to do. Every president is a kind of hostage of the system. So the things he spoke before the election, nobody knows what's going on later. But about sanctions, I'm personally absolutely against sanctions. I voted against sanctions from the first single vote on 17th of July 2014. And I know that the number of MEPs who vote in the same way are increasing. Which means that attitude is changing. It's really changing.
But Mr. Lietz, can I get your vision as well, coming from Germany, as to these sanctions? You know, how effective have they been? We already had a lot of lukewarm countries to those sanctions. Italy, Greece, I believe. Germany was a bit the force that kept them in place. Is it also ready to maybe put them away?
Well, it's not only Germany; it's also France. We are doing together their format. And we just had another round of negotiations with the Ukrainians and with the Russians. And Russia is not moving to the extent we are hoped that they will move. So therefore, I would stick to the sanctions. I have another opinion on that. The question is what we might have not achieved, not only, but what we have achieved, which is a war. Russia is with military forces on other territory, and therefore I'm very keen that we keep that, and I would actually like to enlarge the sanctions not only at a half-year period, but as a year period to really show that we mean it.
So you think these sanctions are having an effect, Ms. Zdanoka? Do you agree? Do you think because they cost the EU quite a lot, you know, even compared to the US?
Well, war costs more.
You see, these sanctions has just opposite effect to what was waited from those who imposed them. You must not understand nothing about Russians and the Russian character. If you are pressing Russians, they resist much more.
A very important point is that France was going to sell 2 big ships, army ships, which have been dropped to sell them to Russia. So the question is what kind of sanctions you do. For example, moving forward, and Germany has gone a long path to restrain the sanctions step by step if you have progressive on political movements, but Minsk is actually going backwards. The Minsk II agreement has not been agreed on. So therefore, I would say weapons and other certain points should definitely be sanctioned still on the field.
You know, I agree with Tatiana. We know exactly that during the period of sanctions, personal rate of Mr. Putin is growing. We know a lot of examples of imposed sanctions which never worked. Fidel Castro, who passed away previous week, lived under the sanctions for like 60 years. And what? I mean, the regime was there, Cuba was there, problems were there. They just do not work. This is the problem. Well, and we have a huge losses in the agricultural sector. And in fact, European Union is split if we speak in terms of attitude towards Russia, and this is a huge problem.
You mentioned there, the EU starting to split on the issue of Russia, a reliance, we were saying, in terms of agriculture, the EU has been hit badly with the Russian embargo back on our goods. Also, when it comes to energy, the EU really needs Russia. I mean, look at Germany, Mr. Leitz, a lot of the gas imports come from Russia, not something willing to really give up on or can give up on. Surely that has a very strong influence here.
Well, I actually challenge two situations. First of all, if sanctions have a change or not, we have seen together with Russia on the Iran nuclear deal. This was pure based on sanctions, and therefore I would like to stick on that.
But Russia was involved there. I mean...
but you asking on how sanctions are, if they work or not, yes, they had a big influence. And the costs we have to take into that we're not having the deal. So the agriculture situation is one of the situations we have to take in consideration.
But also in terms of energy or reliance
but the energy
on Russia
situation
energy
is,
means that we're going to
for
be
example,
open to that,
I would like to have... yes, we are dependent on Russia, on energy, but also we should actually reduce our dependency.
Ms. Tom, do you think we need to reduce our reliance on Russia or adapt and indeed soften our stance, soften the EU stance?
I think we definitely need dialogue with Russia. It is very stupid not to try to have this dialogue.
Well, let's look though politically at the split happening in Europe. We saw recent elections. The president in Bulgaria is more a ceremonial role rather than the government who has the power, the prime minister. Yet the man that got elected is definitely more pro-Russian than the other candidates. In France, we have the candidate for the centre-right party, François Fillon, and the candidate for the far-right party, Marine Le Pen, both very much more pro-Moscow than their predecessors, and also wanting to end those sanctions. Could we see next year a break coming in that French-German alliance, anti-Russian alliance, if you like?
Well, if I've seen the Normandy format, we have been just having, again, throughout the last days, France is standing on the side of Germany to really work towards the situation that we have Minsk agreements which have to be kept. But there's always a change possible. Mr. Trump said Putin is a nice guy. He pleased him. So I'm very thankful for you to bring that in. But I don't hope that we are playing that card to move towards Russia to that big extent,
because if
not keeping up the
France
international rights.
elects somebody pro-Russian, that will mean the EU will become pro-Russian.
But the situation, for example, in France also had a situation that the Front National was supported by Russian banks having the election campaign. So we have to be very careful also how Russia is trying to influence our political situation on the ground.
I see certain contradiction here for now with our German colleague is speaking about sanctions, but on the other hand, we know exactly that Germans are in favor of Nord Stream 2, for instance, which means that you are in favor of sanctions, but on the other hand, you are ready to build this pipeline and it's okay for you. For instance,
Germany is divided
country,
on this situation.
Yes,
we have not voted on that. And therefore, there's also a split even amongst ourselves here in the European Parliament.
Oh.
They're not all Germans in favor of the Nord Stream 2.
Okay,
this whole thing to just connect sanctions with the Minsk agreement is a little bit unbiased, because Russia is not is intermediary, not the part in Minsk agreement.
It's for the annexation of Crimea.
Well, there are Russian soldiers in
the reason,
Crimea.
Official reason for sanctions, for last package of sanctions is connected to Minsk.
Well, it looks like the candidate in France, François Fillon, says that the EU provoked Russia by expanding NATO's presence in Eastern Europe. Does he have a point? Is Europe also looking for trouble in a way?
We are provoking ourselves vice versa, so to say. Russia is provoking NATO, NATO is provoking Russia, and I'm coming from the country directly on this Russian border, and believe me, it's not a very peaceful environment back there. We have a kind of dilemmas. We want to have more investments, but at the same time we're visibly preparing for war, so we have just to make a choice. We want to prepare for war, or we want to have more investments, and this is also a dilemma for Eastern Europe. It is a problem for us.
Indeed,
definitely.
Russia has deployed an air missile defense system in Kaliningrad, situated between Lithuania and Poland. A lot of people are worried about that. And we heard this week from 14 European leaders saying that they need to absolutely, led by, I believe, German Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier, saying have to enter new talks with Russia to put new checks and balances on the build-up military on both sides.
Absolutely. Like, the only key is how we solve the situation is more dialogue and constant dialogue. We want to have dialogues with NATO and Russia, and we have to move backwards to that status quo, but also the OSCE is a very important point that Russia, there's another anchor point where we can and should work together even closer.
But is there something to be worried about, Ms. Danica?
Yeah.
You know, we see this build-up now. We're saying, you know, Russia moving closer to the border. They annexed Crimea. A lot of Europeans are afraid.
Listen, I guess NATO is moving towards Russia, not Russia. Russia stays at its place where
they
it
are
was.
situated in Ukraine.
Yeah. So to speak on Russian involvement in Ukraine, it is the same as to speak about French part of Belgium, that they are involved in some French things. Only connection is that this part of Ukraine, that is east of Ukraine and Crimea, is populated by Russian speakers. But these people have the right for self-determination and they have the right to life.
Okay.
It has been taken
Which
military-wise.
is questioned very much
The international law has been broken by
Kiev,
Russia on that.
by Kiev agreement.
Well, also on the
international law, we can speak about Kosovo, we can speak about the United of Germany.
Okay,
I'm very sorry.
But there was
It was also a break of international law, this incorporation of East Germany by West
Let's
Germany.
look at another resolution passed here in the European Parliament on the 23rd of November. MEPs called for stronger EU action against Russia and the Islamist media campaigns, wanting to find a weapon in what they describe as an information war.
A new offensive against Russian propaganda. On the 23rd of November, the European Parliament voted for a resolution condemning all propaganda coming from the so-called Islamic State group and from Russia. The Parliament accused Russian media, including Russia Today and the website Sputnik, of distorting the truth in order to discredit European institutions. The resolution was proposed by Polish MEP Anna Fotyga and garnered support from European MEPs, alarmed at the way Moscow is pushing its propaganda.
I think it's high time that the European Parliament started to deal with the challenges of the information war and came up with some good and sensible solutions. I think it's perfectly suitable now that we've seen the US, the election campaign, and even before that, the Brexit campaign, where we were able to observe just how propaganda influences and how propaganda is aiming to weaken ties within the EU.
According to Western secret services, Vladimir Putin could use targeted cyber attacks to disrupt upcoming elections in France and Germany as an attempt to destabilize the European Union. The Russian president has reacted strongly to the accusations, saying they amount to a clear failure in Western society's understanding of democracy. But some MEPs feel that the resolution should not have covered both Russia and the so-called Islamic State group.
This report focuses on one country, Russia. And what I believe is even more worrying is that despite our resistance, ISIS is included in this. Without doubt, it uses similar tactics, but of course, it's not a state, and that is where the problem lies.
MEPs are also proposing to reinforce the communication strategy of the European Union to help EU citizens have a more critical understanding of media outlets.
Ms. Toma, lumping Russia in a resolution with ISIS, is that the best plan?
This is absolutely stupid. There are several points in this resolution, and the main is, of course, that we deal with them together in the frame of the same document. ISIS, as we know, is not a state, and Russia is a state, which means that if we deal with them together, we recognize ISIS as a state, which is absolutely stupid. And the second thing, this is very, very clear attempt to have censorship in European media. This is absolutely unacceptable.
We heard from Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that he felt that this resolution showed a degradation of democracy in the West. He said putting restrictions is contrary to democracy. Mr. Letz, he has a point, does he not?
Well, I've been interviewed by Russian media throughout the last weeks, and they have taken out sentences and put them in a different context. When I challenged that, then they changed it again. This was by Sputnik, for example, who was situated in Berlin. Very interesting situation, but also we had a very serious case on a young girl which was supposedly raped but then it turned out she was just having school problems in Germany. And Russian media forced the situation to have German-Russian background demonstrating in Berlin. So Lavrov even took that up. So yes, we are in a certain media situation where Russia tries to attempt to showcase
we can
Germany on a
present
big
these
scale.
situations very often. Just recent situation in Riga. There was a clash between British soldiers who came to McDonald's and accused one local, beat him, and he was injured. And then BBC reported that this local was some Russian who is Russian journalist, while he was in all press in media, Latvian guy who has any relations with
the BBC is a well-known
Russia.
media. There is an increasing worry as well that online there's a lot of unaccountable media, that there's a lot of sources that can't be traced so easily. Is that controllable, Ms. Thom? What does the EU see as possible as controlling that?
I'm a former journalist myself, and I strongly believe that there is no media without propaganda. There is no media without propaganda. And I have absolutely the same experience with European media, as you said about Russia. And I have the same problems with Russian media. That is the reason when I came to Russia, I go only to if it is on air. They can now cut out nothing, and this is the only way. But we have to speak with them, and this is not a political matter of politicians to dictate European people which channel they should watch and which they should not.
I haven't said that, but I would challenge this situation of free media.
This resolution. It was written in this resolution.
Voted in favor. Yeah,
this is a
well,
problem.
I have to say, I'm for one going to defend the media in the European Union. Look, we have varying views around this very table. But sadly, we're going to have to leave it at that for this part of the show. Thanks indeed to my guests for having joined. Thanks also to you at home for having watched. Join us again after the news for the second half of Talking Europe.